Hello again, John Robertson, your volunteer Oscar librarian, coming back to you with a fourth video looking at eForm generation. We're going to circle back a little bit to the eForm generator for just a moment, and then we're actually going to move past the eForm generator to customizing, improving, and otherwise updating eForms that were originally made in the eForm generator. But before we leave the generator, I did want to circle back to one thing. I talked to you briefly about getting measurements from the patient's chart into the eForm that you're creating. So things like height and weight and BMI, or even lab values. Now, I talked to you about both bringing them in and pushing them back. And I want to be clear that if you do decide to create an input where you do both of those things, then it will register in Oscar as though you've made a new measurement on the day that you submitted the eForm. So if you pull a patient's height into an eForm, and that eForm pushes and pulls both at the same time, then Oscar will recognize that as being you measured that patient's height again on the day that you filled out that eForm. So we do have to be a little bit careful about whether we just want to pull the measurement out of the chart or whether we also want to push it back into the chart. So I'm here at the spot where we add fields one at a time, and I've selected single line input. I've also gone into the measurement type and I've selected height from the measurement type and asked to pull the value from the chart of the patient's height. Now, if we move down a little bit further to the naming portion here, we can sequentially name them automatically. We can put in a custom unique name, or the third option, if we want to push the measurement back into the patient's chart, export the value as it says here, then we would select the same measurement type, so in this case height, and we would push the value back into the patient's chart. Once we've selected both of those things, if we go into the eForm and we were to draw an input in the eForm, that would create an input that both pulled the measurement from the patient's chart and also pushed it back into the patient's chart. That's the end of what I wanted to talk about with the eForm generator. Now we're going to go past that, and we're going to look at what we can do with our eForm code in a text editor. You will remember that I talked about both the Notepad++ text editor and the Microsoft Visual Basic Code editor. I am more comfortable and familiar with Notepad++, but there certainly are advantages to both of these. We're going to jump over to the text editor now, and we're going to look at this mood disorder questionnaire that I made in the last 3 videos. And we're going to talk about how we can further add things to this using a text editor. You'll see here that I've got highlighted the reference to the background image. And if we look at this reference, we do have an ID for it. We have a source for it. And the beginning of the code for the source starts with a $sign, and then it's got the curly brackets, and it's got Oscar image path. Now, Oscar image path is telling this eForm to look for your background image in a certain place in Oscar. The problem with that when we're using the text editor is that if we were to go to this form outside of Oscar, we won't see the image. It'll just show us a broken image sign. I'll show you here in a second. So I have loaded the code for the eForm that we created into Firefox, and you'll see all the inputs I created, but Over on the top left here, you see a broken picture, basically, and that tells me that the code cannot find the image that I'm referencing, and that's because we're outside of OSCAR. We'll jump back to the text editor now, and the one way that we can see the image is if we take out the part of the source that starts with the $sign and has the curly brackets in it. So if I were to start just inside the quotations and delete everything up till the end of the curly brackets, and then save this again. And now if I were to go to Firefox and refresh, there's the background image that wasn't visible before. Now, obviously, this is a pain to have to delete and then undelete this code back and forth. So you actually can put some code into your eForm so that this automatically figures out whether you are inside or outside of OSCAR, and will show you the background image regardless of whether you are inside of OSCAR. So let's go ahead and do that for this form. So the first thing I did was put that code back into the image line. So the $sign and everything inside the curly brackets and the curly brackets are all back now. And the next thing I have to do is I have to put some code in the head of the eForm so that we can always see the image regardless of where we are. So now I have jumped back to the editor here, but I've added in a JavaScript, and I've also added in a reference to the JavaScript. So if we look here, I've created a function called reimage, and in that I've defined a variable as the source image here, and then this code here is going to decide whether we want to look inside the OSCAR image path or not. I also have to reference that JavaScript. So down here in body, onload reimage. So when the eForm loads up, it will run that code for me, and then it'll decide whether we are inside or outside of OSCAR and make sure I can always see that image. Now, if I have more than one page to my form, then I need more than one variable for each of the images. So if I have 2 pages, then what I need to do is add another variable here. So we're just going to do that. And now we've added another variable here. So page 2 is src2 here, background image 2 here, background image 2 here, and src2 here. And you can keep doing that for however many pages you have. We also use something similar but slightly different if we are using references to other pages that we print, but we don't necessarily need to print. So we'll get into that later, but there's also a way, instead of a source, to use an HTML to be able to see other links outside of OSCAR. So now we are going to go back to the eForm that we see in Firefox, and we will have this code, the $sign and the curly brackets, in our code, which prevented us from seeing the image outside of OSCAR. But we also have this code now, which allows us to see it both inside and outside of OSCAR. So now we are back in Firefox, and we can see the image. And we'll refresh just to prove that all that code that we added has now allowed us to see the image outside of Oscar as well as inside. That's usually my first step when I'm taking something made in the eForm generator that I want to edit outside of the eForm generator, because it makes it easier for me to visualize what's going on, and I don't have to turn that on and off manually every time. The next thing I will say is that it looks like some of our radio boxes aren't exactly where I want them to be. You may remember that when we were creating these radio boxes in the eForm generator, they were actually square, but the code in the eForm generator creates circles when you actually see it either inside or outside of Oscar. So the most obvious thing that I need to change is this line down here where my radio boxes are a little bit too far to the right. And unfortunately, I can't simply reopen this back up in the eForm generator with the 7.4 version, because it won't reload eForms once we've finished with them the first time around. So I do have to go into my text editor to do this. If I look at these circles, they probably need to be, I'm going to say 3 or 4 pixels up and probably 5 pixels back. So I have to find these 4 radio boxes and lift all of them up about 3 or 4 pixels and back about 5 pixels. We'll go back to my text editor, and the tricky bit, of course, is going to be figuring out where my radio boxes are. Now, one trick I can use here is that the first radio boxes are all far off to the right-hand side, and the left number here, 575 and 631, is far off to the right-hand side. But if I go down to this number 29 here, where I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 radio boxes, all with problem as their name, that's the only place on the eForm where I have 4 radio boxes all grouped together. And I'll also notice that left 99 is actually much further to the left than left 575. So these have to be the boxes that I'm looking for. So I am going to subtract 5 from these 4 numbers, and I'm going to subtract 3 from these 4 numbers, and then I'm going to refresh the Firefox page, and we're going to see how it worked. So you can see that I've subtracted 5 from these 4 numbers. I'm just going to change this down 5, and we will do the same with the rest of these. And now I'm going to save, and I'm going to go into Firefox. And if I refresh the screen in Firefox, those 4 boxes should move. And that's actually not a bad place for them. I think I'm going to leave them right there. I certainly could go and change some of the other boxes and line them up a little bit if I wanted to. But basically, we do have our first page more or less the way we want to. You'll notice that we can see the second page, and that is because when I did the code earlier, I put code in to see both the first and second page. We're going to stop there. I'm going to come back, and the next video will be all about using the text editors to modify and improve your eForms that you created in the eForm generator. Thanks for watching. See you again when we move on to beyond the eForm generator, and I'll either name that 5 or 1 depending on how I feel.